Hey guys, it's Charles Jaeger with PremiumBeat.com. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to stitch 360 footage from start to finish in After Effects. The footage we're going to stitch is from a dual lens 360 camera, which is what most common consumer 360 cameras are. Essentially, we have a front and a back camera, and each lens records a fisheye spherical view. This benefits people who don't own an expensive stitching program but do have After Effects. Using this method, users can stitch their own footage, which often yields much better results than the basic stitching software that comes with most consumer level 360 cameras. Alright guys, before we get started, I do want to mention that I've included some unstitched 360 footage like I'm going to be using today that you can download from the blog post for this tutorial on PremiumBeat.com, but feel free to use your own footage as well, as we are going to be going through this step by step. This tutorial can also serve as a nice introduction to understanding how 360 video is created and the various troubleshooting and issues that can arise. Alright, let's get started in After Effects. Alright, so the first thing we need to do is we need to turn on GPU acceleration in the project settings, and this is because most of the immersive video effects require this to be on. So I'm just going to come here to File, and then Project Settings, and then under Video Rendering, I'm going to change this to be GPU acceleration, and click OK. If you don't have that on, you may see a red warning banner pop up when you apply the various immersive video effects, and again, all you need to do is just make sure that's turned on, that'll go away. Alright, so let's start over here with my Gear 360 footage. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag this into a new composition and we'll take a look at this. So with Gear 360 footage, what it does is you can see I have two different views, the dual lens 360 camera. It saves the video file in a unique way in the sense that both views are on one video file. So on your 360 camera, it may have these split up into two different files, and that's okay. We're going to essentially be doing that here in After Effects as well, but I just want to keep you aware of that in case your format looks like this. However, one thing we need to note about this footage as it is right now, you'll notice it's in a 2:1 aspect ratio. So what that basically means, and whenever I say that, is because your footage may be a different resolution, what I'm referring to is it's 2 across. You can see 1, 2 by 1 high. So whatever the height is, the width is going to be double that, and that's 2:1. So what we need to do is we need to split these up into two different views, each in their own composition, and it needs to be 1:1. So if I come over here, I'm just going to right click and go to Composition Settings, and I'll bring this up here. So again, we can see the width here is double the height, and if we look over here at the aspect ratio, it's going to say 2:1. So that's a good signifier there. Now again, your 360 clips may be a different width and height. Another very common width is going to be 4096 when you're dealing with another aspect ratio that could be 2:1. Anyway, let's just go ahead and split this clip up. That way you'll kind of understand where I'm going with this. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name this composition Shot A. And I'm going to come down here to the width, and I'm just going to click in here, and after that I'm going to add in divide by 2 and just click outside of that area, and you're going to see it's automatically going to divide that by 2. Now we have a 1:1 aspect ratio, and that'll even work with your footage even if it's a different resolution. Again, that's why it's cool to do that divide by 2. And so I'm just going to come down here and click OK. So what I need to do with my clip, because it has both of these views on the same video, I need to align one view right in the center of this composition. So I'm going to come up here to Window, I'm going to select the align options here, and I'm just going to align this to the left. With my footage selected, you can see it's automatically going to snap that over, so now it's pixel perfect for this. So this is now is 1:1. So I'm just come over here to the project settings, and I'm going to select that composition for Shot A, and I'm going to hit Control D or Command D on a Mac, and that's going to duplicate that. You can see I have another one here. So I'm going to double click that one, and I'm going to right click over here in the gray area to go back to the composition settings for this one, and I'm just going to rename this one Shot B. And click OK. And now I'm going to select my footage, and now I want to align that to the right. So now you can see that move that completely over. Now it's snapped it pixel perfect here. So now we've essentially just separated each of our views. If your footage was already separated, again, you can just add them to a new composition and name those Shot A and Shot B. So now what I want to do is I want to select Shot A, and I want to add that into a new composition. So I'm just going to drag this down here, add it to a new comp. And on that comp, I'm just going to click it, hit Enter, and I'm going to name this Final Output. And now inside of that composition, again, we're doing a lot with pre-comps and everything, so just make sure you follow these steps closely. I'm going to right click in here under composition settings for that comp, and we want this one to be 2:1 again. So whatever the width is, just select in here, and I'm going to add in times 2, which is asterisk 2 there. And if I just click outside here, you're going to see now it's went to 2:1 there for the ratio. And again, that's what we want our final output to be, is a 2:1, because it's going to be an equirectangular spherical format. So I'm going to come back over here and click OK. So now we can see we have our Shot A side of our view in here, and we have that spherical fisheye dome view. And we need to convert this so it's no longer fisheye and so that it's kind of more equirectangular, like a traditional 360 video looks. So we're gonna come here to the effects and presets, and I'm gonna type in VR. That's gonna toggle all the immersive video effects over here. And I'm gonna select this effect called VR Converter. I'm just gonna drag and drop that onto my shot A. And if we come up here to input, you're gonna see the default is on 2D source and the output's equirectangular. And then the frame width is gonna be the size of our composition. So that all looks good. We need to change the input though to be fisheye full dome. And now you can see something kind of interesting has happened here. It's converted that to now be more of a square format. It kind of basically just stretched it out. And it's converted that footage to now be perfectly 1-to-1 by making it square. And you can see over here, it's almost as if we've divided this into 4 areas. You can see we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And this view is taking up 50% of the view, and the other view is gonna take up these 2 areas. And so right now everything's looking correct. So what I'm gonna do is come back to my project settings, and for shot B, I'm gonna select it. I'm gonna put it on top of shot A in here. We're also gonna apply VR Converter to our shot B. And again, we're gonna come up here to input, and we're gonna change that to be fisheye full dome. And now you'll see that's stretched out perfectly there. But again, we need to offset it. So if we come down here to reorient the camera view, we're gonna come down here to pan, and I'm just gonna type in 180. Now you can see how it shifted that over. I can go ahead and just kind of animate this, and you can see kind of what's happening. How it's like a seamless, the way it wraps around there. So again, I wanna set that to be 180 degrees. So now you can kind of see the start of our 360 video being stitched together. Now right now it's not stitched seamlessly. We have these horrible seam lines through here, and you can kind of see some duplications of stuff. But a cool thing is if we zoom in here, you can kind of see where we start needing matching things up. So you can see, I believe the lenses on the Gear 360, the camera I'm using, they have like a 190 degree field of view, and that's so that little 10% kind of overlaps, and that kind of helps with stitching. So you can see we have this kind of tree sticking out here, and you can see that's on both of our camera views. So essentially we need this to be aligned on top of that. And if we come back over here, we can see the same thing with a few different things like this one here. It matches up with that one there. Now one thing that's important to note when we do stitch this together is we need to pick a parallax point. And what that really refers to is you're probably gonna wanna stitch to something far off in the distance, because if you stitch to something close, like you can see this little area of grass right here, if I stitch these two to be perfectly aligned, stuff in the further background may not be perfectly aligned, and that's just something you're gonna have to kind of decide for yourself, because when we're dealing with 2 different lenses, even though they're really close together, they're not in the exact same point, so there will be some parallax difference between the 2. And so again, we'll kind of go through that as we move forward with this. So the first thing we need to do is we need this to feather a little bit better from shot B to shot A. And the way we're gonna do that is I'm gonna come back into my shot B composition. So what we need to do is we need to mask around our footage here and feather it out. Now again, in my case, because my footage has both views on this particular clip, it's not quite as easy for me to just select the mask tool and just double click. So what I'm gonna have to do in my case with my shot, and if your shot is like this as well, I'm just gonna need to go ahead and pre-compose this one more time. So I'll select my footage down here, and I'm gonna go to Layer, and I'm gonna come down here to Pre-compose, and then I wanna select Move All Attributes into a new composition, and just go ahead and click OK. And what that does, it makes it now 1-to-1 for this comp. And so with my footage selected now, I'm gonna come here to the mask tool, and I'm gonna select the ellipse tool, and just double click. You're gonna see it's gonna create a perfectly spherical mask for our footage. Now I'm gonna come down here and I'm gonna turn on the mask visibility so we can see that. Now we need to go ahead and feather this out. So I'm gonna come down here, my mask options down here, and toggle this down. And under mask feather, I'm gonna go ahead and type in 30 pixels. And you can see it's gonna add just a little bit of feather to our mask, but we also need to expand it down -30, because as it is right now, that feather looks good right in this area, but it's gonna actually be clipping right here at this edge. So I'm gonna go ahead and type in -30 just to kind of shrink that down a little bit. You can see how that does that there. That just ensures that we don't have any feathering making any contact with the edges of our composition, because we don't want those lines to show up. So now let's jump back over to the final output comp and take a look at what's happening. So now you can see that feathering is occurring right through here, and you can see we have that black area, and that's essentially where there is no video. So right now, each of our half views is taking up roughly 180 degrees of the total 360 degrees of our video. And what I mean by that is I have my shot A footage selected, and you can see field of view for VR Converter is set to 180 degrees. So I'll just zoom in here. And I'm actually gonna select shot B, and you're gonna see what's gonna happen when we adjust this, because we need these to overlap. So when I go ahead and adjust this, you can see if I pull it down, it's taking up less of the field of view. And I can actually increase this so that it actually does overlap. You can see, so that's how we're essentially gonna be stitching this together. And for you and your particular camera, your settings may be a little bit different than what I'm doing with mine. Again, you just kind of have to do this until it looks right. Now, actually just setting this around 200 for this particular clip looks pretty good. However, I'd rather adjust both of them so that I'm not just overstretching one of the clips. So I'm gonna bring shot B back down to something like 192 degrees. So again, these lenses roughly cover about 190 degrees, so it may be somewhere in between there when you're doing the overlap. So I'm gonna come back down here to shot A, and I'm gonna bring this up a little bit as well to kind of meet in the middle with that other clip. And as I increase this, it looks like I'm kind of basing it off of this tree right there. Somewhere around 196 looks pretty good there to meet in the middle with that particular clip. So you can see if I go ahead and turn on and off shot B, you can see how that overlap is kind of occurring. And so you just need to do this until your seam line goes away. And I'm gonna look over here at this tree as well. And I believe that's the initial one that I stitched this to, you can see. Now, one interesting thing to note is that this is a little bit off on the actual roll axis. So I'm actually gonna select shot B, and you can see, and this is kind of common with Gear 360 cameras I've noticed, but I'm gonna come over here to the roll axis here, and you can see I can adjust this. So I'm gonna bring this up just about -1 degrees, just rotating that, and I feel like that aligns that a little bit better. And I may bring shot A back down a little bit. Now you can see this is what I was referring to with the parallax issue. You can see as I kind of aligned this tree, because it's a little bit closer to the camera than this tree further in the distance, that's going to be kind of the parallax issue. So you have to decide for yourself where you want to stitch that to, if you want to stitch it farther in the distance or something close up. And I actually prefer the distance here on this one, so I'm going to increase this back so those kind of line up. And because of the way these trees are set up, that one kind of gets hidden there for that particular case. So now you can see we've essentially done a quick stitch on our 360 footage. Now, one thing you will notice up here in the sky, we have a little bit of what looks like a seam line. And what this actually is a vignette from those really wide angle lenses on this camera. The further out to the edges it gets a little bit darker. We have another issue here, it's very common, and that is that the sun in this case is hitting one lens more than the other. So you can see it's definitely more so on this back lens than it is on the front. And what that's doing is it's washing out this because it's flaring up on this side, and this other lens is really in the shade. It's not getting direct sunlight like this one is. So again, that's going to kind of create a seam line just because of the exposure difference. However, there's a few adjustments we can make on shot B to help get rid of that. So I'm going to come back over here to shot B, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to right click here, and I'm going to create a new adjustment layer. And then on that adjustment layer, I'm going to come up here and select the ellipse tool again and just double click. So that adds a mask onto that adjustment layer, a circle mask, just like we did on our footage. And on my adjustment layer, I'm going to apply the effect color correction curves. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here to the effects controls, and I'm actually going to lock that effect. That way it's going to stay there, and we can adjust it when we're looking at our final output comp. So I'll come back over here to my final output comp. And I'm just going to zoom in here where we can kind of see where that vignette's occurring. And I'm going to increase the brightness here just a little bit, just to try to alleviate some of that. And I'm going to show you kind of what I'm going to do here, the way we're going to kind of feather this together. So I've increased the exposure there a little bit. So I'm going to come back over here to shot B, and I can go ahead and unlock that now from the effects controls. Now, I don't want this to actually affect the entire clip. I just kind of want it to affect the edges here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to that mask, and I'm going to hit Control D or Command D on a Mac to duplicate it. And on that mask too, I'm going to come down here to the options. I'm actually going to set this to be subtract. And under expansion, I'm going to bring this down, and you're going to see it's kind of creating this ring now around our footage. So that's exactly what we want, because we want it to kind of brighten up right in that vignetted area where it's a little bit darker. But again, obviously we need to feather this out. So I'm going to increase this quite a bit. I'm going to increase the mask expansion here to be -200. Then I'm going to make the mask feather be something like 150. So it's really feathered, so it goes from a little bit brighter then back into our normal exposure. So let's jump back over to the final output. Now we can still see a little bit of vignetting there, but it's definitely alleviated it quite a bit from the way it was before. And again, a lot of this is just occurring because of the exposure difference here with the sun, so it's pretty tough to combat that. I am going to show you another way we can actually paint this out using VR Converter here in just a little bit. We can take a look here at a quick before and after with the snapshot here, so you can see how it did brighten up those edges just a bit to help kind of alleviate some of that vignetting. So essentially where we are right now is we've done a basic stitch on our 360 footage by feathering everything together, and you can see I can go ahead and scroll through the timeline here and we will see the footage playing. And so this now is in the equirectangular format that we would upload to something like YouTube. Now again, we have a few issues here with that vignetting, and we have the camera rig and everything else in the shot. However, if you want to go ahead and render this out as is, you could, and you've already stitched together your footage. However, if you do want to go ahead and get rid of any issues like this you might have, or the camera rig, we can go ahead and paint those out now using the VR Comp Editor. And I'll go ahead and walk you guys through that process. So I'm going to come back over to my project panel, and on my final output composition, I'm going to need to go ahead and pre-compose this again. So I'm just going to drag this down here, add it to a new comp, and that'll be called Final Output 2, and that's perfectly fine. Now we need to open up the VR Comp Editor. So I'm going to come up here to Window, and all the way down here at the very bottom, you're going to see VR Comp Editor. Go ahead and select that, and that's going to launch this dockable panel. So I'm just going to select this and dock it over here. And so what we need to do to paint this stuff out is we need to add a 2D edit. So I'm going to select Add 2D Edit, and that's going to pop up these options here. And we need to select our composition. Again, our new composition is Final Output 2, and that's what's selected here. If you don't see it, just go ahead and select it. And you can leave all these other settings on the defaults. And I'm going to go ahead and select Add 2D Edit. And that's going to open up this edit view. So now you can see over here in the final output, we have Edit 1 and we have our Open Output Render. And so we're currently in the Edit 1 view, and I'm going to go ahead and hit C on the keyboard. That's going to bring up the camera tool, and I can actually look around now like it's an actual 360 video. So looking at this, we can see kind of where that vignette line is occurring. And so I'm just going to center that up the best I can. And I'm going to come here and select the clone stamp tool. And then what I need to do is I need to double click on my composition. So 1, 2, and now we're in an area where we can actually paint out this footage. So one important thing to note is you want your current time indicator to be right at the very beginning of your clip, because what we're actually doing is we're going to be resampling parts of the video and placing them over this seam line. And this works really well in our case with a shot like this with the sky. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to move this down so we can kind of see my brushes. And I'm just going to use a fairly large brush, and I want it to be round, and I'm going to have the hardness be all the way down to 0%, so we have a nice feather on it, and the spacing around 50% or so. So I'm just going to sample something over in this area and just place it over here on this kind of seam line vignette. So I'm going to hold Alt and click, just so I know where I want to sample from. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a vertical stroke here on this one. So I'm just going to click and just roll up with that line. And you can see how we're kind of painting that out, and you can go ahead and continue to adjust that as much as you see fit. But now you can see we've really helped alleviate how that looked. And all I need to do now is come back over here to my Open Output Render. I'm going to select that. And now you can see we've painted out that seam line that was on the right hand side. And so let's go ahead and get the other seam line over here. So what I need to do is add another 2D edit. And again, we're going to select Final Output and select Add 2D Edit. And now you can see now we're on Edit 2. So let's zoom in here, select C on the keyboard, orbit over here, line that one up in the center area, and select the clone stamp tool and just double click. And now again, we've got the clone stamp tool again, so I'm gonna go ahead and select Alt and click over here and just resample this and roll up with that line there. Again, keep in mind it is resampling the footage, so if you have someone actually walking around your camera, or if your camera's moving, this really won't work because it would resample that area where that person was, and you'll definitely know it when you see it. But in my case here, where the camera's static on a tripod and it's just the sky we're kind of resampling, this won't be that noticeable and it'll feather quite nicely. So now I'm going to come back over here to Open Output Render. And now you can see we've gotten rid of that seam line over there. But while we're at it, we might as well paint out the tripod. So I'm going to go back over here and add another 2D edit. And again, Final Output, select Add 2D Edit. And I'll just zoom in here. And with the camera tool again, hitting C on the keyboard, I want to look down perfectly on top of that tripod. And again, I'm going to select the clone stamp tool and just double click. Now we can go ahead and paint this out. And I'm actually going to paint this out a little bit differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and alt click over here kind of on this dirt. And I'm actually just going to kind of blot this. So just kind of clicking and letting that blend together quite nicely. I don't want to do like solid strokes like I did for the sky there, because this is just a little bit different type terrain. And so I think that looks pretty good. Just keep in mind it is resampling the video. So if there's any other like noticeable activity in this area, that could get resampled into this area. But with this shot, this will work fine. So I'm gonna come back over here to Open Output Render. And now we can see that's been painted out. So now we need to go ahead and render this out from After Effects. And you can see when we're using VR Comp Editor, what it does, it creates a new folder over here, which will be the name of our composition we were working on. If I go ahead and toggle this down, you'll see a comp that says output, and that's the one we actually want to render from. If you didn't use the VR comp editor, you can just render out your final output comp from before. However, now I'm just going to come down here to the render queue, and I'm going to select that final output VR output that we had from the VR comp editor, and that's the one that has everything painted out on it. So I'm just going to drag and drop that down here in the render queue. Now, I don't recommend rendering out from Media Encoder. That's probably going to give you some errors when you're using some of these more intense effects like the immersive video effects. I definitely recommend rendering straight from After Effects. And so I'm going to probably have to render out as a QuickTime file, and you can render out as a ProRes file if you're on a Mac or something like that. And then we can go ahead and convert that in Media Encoder to be H.264. That's just kind of one of the drawbacks here, is that a lot of times you may get errors if you try to render directly in Media Encoder. So I'm going to come over here to the output module, and I'm going to go ahead and select custom, and I'm going to change this to format to be a QuickTime file. And for format options, I'm going to have the codec be a photo JPEG at 95% quality since I'm on a PC here, and I'll click OK and OK, and then you can go ahead and name your file and then just go ahead and click render. Now, the render times will vary with this, but they will be somewhat intensive because of the VR effects and the VR comp editor effect we did with all the kind of footage painting and remapping there. Once you've rendered out your footage from After Effects, I've went ahead and opened up Media Encoder. Now I want to go ahead and export it out as an H.264, which is going to have that VR metadata embedded into it. So I'm just going to double click here to add in my footage. I'll just select my clip that I just rendered, select open. So on my clip, it's already at H.264 by default, but if it's not, go ahead and turn it to H.264. And then under settings, I'm going to select that, and under presets, I'm just going to toggle this down, and you're going to see we have these VR presets, and our footage is monoscopic in our case, and it has stereo audio, so I'm going to select that. And then if we scroll down here, you're going to see what this is doing. It adds in that VR video monoscopic metadata to this. That way when we upload this to YouTube or Facebook, it's going to recognize it as a 360 video. As far as other settings from there that I recommend, I'd probably recommend turning on the render at maximum depth and use maximum render quality. And then as far as bitrate encoding, I'd probably change this to something like variable bitrate and set this to be around target bitrate of 100 and a maximum bitrate around 150. I know YouTube recommends having a bitrate of 150, and these are really high, but a lot of times you want them to be really high with a 360 video because you want the least amount of compression possible, and unfortunately we're having to upload it in an H.264 format, which really is prone to compression because it's not like we're viewing this entire video all at one time. We're viewing a small slice of this video, so any compression that is added to the footage will be very noticeable. So again, these are the settings that I typically use, and I think that YouTube recommends, but feel free to experiment and use your own target bit rates. I know on certain videos I have to lower them all the way down to like 50 megabits per second, and they can look okay as well. It just depends on your type of footage. So now you're ready to go ahead and export out your 360 video with that VR metadata from Media Encoder. Alright guys, hopefully you learned some tips for stitching 360 footage in After Effects. Make sure y'all check out the Premium Beat blog. Every weekday they're posting lots of filmmaking content and new tutorials just like this one. And they have lots of freebies on there you can download as well. This has been Charles Yeager with PremiumBeat.com. Thanks for watching.